Look at this. Every day, giant factories across Asia produce thousands of cars. In China, electric vehicle manufacturers build new vehicles at astonishing speed. In Japan, production systems perfected over decades continue to set global standards. And across Asia, millions of middle-class families can afford products that were once considered luxuries. But almost nobody realizes that the foundation of this system began with a farm boy who hated farming, a boy who left home at the age of 16, a boy who never finished high school, a boy who had no money, no connections, and no clear plan. Yet just a few decades later, half of all the cars on Earth carried his name. His name was Henry Ford. But this is not really the story of Henry Ford. It is the story of an idea so powerful that it helped shape modern manufacturing, modern business, and eventually modern Asia itself. And it all started on a farm. Henry Ford was born in the summer of 1863 on a farm in Michigan. His father loved farming. His neighbors loved farming. Almost everyone around him expected him to become a farmer. But Henry hated it. He later admitted that he never loved farm work. What fascinated him were machines. When other children played games, Henry studied mechanical devices. When he received a pocket watch as a young boy, he took it apart, examined every piece, and then put it back together again. Soon, people in the neighborhood were bringing him watches to repair. Even at a young age, Henry seemed to understand something others did not. Machines could make life easier. Machines could save time. Machines could multiply human effort. Then tragedy struck. When Henry was still a teenager, his mother died unexpectedly. The loss devastated him. The farm, already a place he disliked, now became a place filled with painful memories. And so, at the age of 16, Henry made a decision that would change history. He left home. He boarded a train and headed to Detroit. At the time, Detroit was rapidly transforming into an industrial city. Factories were appearing everywhere. Steam engines powered businesses. New technologies were changing the world. And Henry wanted to be part of it. But here is the question. Why does a farm boy from Michigan matter to modern Asia? Keep that question in mind, because the answer would not appear for many years. Detroit became Henry's classroom. He worked long hours. He learned from machinists. He repaired equipment. He studied every machine he could find. Then he encountered something that completely changed his life. The gasoline engine. Today, that may not sound revolutionary, but at the time, it was. Most machines still relied on steam power. Steam engines were powerful, but they were also heavy, slow, and inconvenient. Gasoline engines were different. They were smaller, faster, more flexible. And Henry immediately saw their potential. Most people looked at gasoline engines and saw an interesting invention. Henry looked at them and saw the future. Around this time, automobiles already existed, but they were not practical for ordinary people. They were expensive, complicated, and often unreliable. Many wealthy people treated them like toys. Most ordinary workers could never dream of owning one. And that is when Henry made a crucial observation. The future was not about building better cars. The future was about making cars affordable. That idea became an obsession, because creating a great product is one thing. Making it affordable for millions of people is something entirely different, and Henry Ford was determined to solve that problem. Most success stories skip over failure. Henry Ford's story cannot, because failure was the price he paid for learning. In the late 1890s, after years of experimentation, Henry built his first automobile. It was crude, it was noisy, and it looked nothing like the cars we know today, but it worked. For Henry, that was enough. Soon, investors became interested. They saw potential, they saw opportunity, and together, they launched Henry's first automobile company. But there was a problem. Henry wanted to improve the technology. His investors wanted quick profits. The two sides constantly disagreed. The company struggled. Production moved slowly. Costs remained high. And eventually, the business failed. Henry lost everything. Most people would have stopped there. Henry did not. He started again and failed again. Another company collapsed. More investors lost confidence. More critics said he would never succeed. But Henry had learned something important. People were not going to invest in an unknown inventor. Before they bought his vision, they had to believe in him. So he came up with a new strategy. He would build racing cars. Not because he loved racing, but because he needed attention. He needed publicity. He needed proof. When his racing cars began defeating competitors, newspapers started writing about him. Investors suddenly became interested again. The same people who once doubted him were now willing to listen. Henry understood a lesson that still applies today. Before people buy your product, they often buy your reputation. And with his growing fame, he launched what would become the Ford Motor Company. This time, failure was no longer an option. Everything was on the line. Most people believe the Model T was Henry Ford's greatest invention. It wasn't. The Model T was important, but it was not the real breakthrough. The real breakthrough was the systems behind it. When the Model T was introduced, Henry had a clear goal. He wanted an ordinary worker to afford an automobile. That was a radical idea. At the time, cars were still considered luxury products. Many manufacturers focused on wealthy customers. Henry focused on everyone else. But there was a problem. Building cars was slow. Workers assembled vehicles almost entirely by hand. Production was expensive. Output was limited. Then Henry discovered something that would change manufacturing forever. During a visit to a slaughterhouse, he observed how products moved through a process step by step. An idea formed in his mind. What if cars moved instead of workers? What if each worker performed one specific task? What if production became a continuous flow? That idea became the assembly line, and it transformed everything. Before the assembly line, building a single car could take more than 12 hours. After the assembly line was fully implemented, production time dropped to roughly 90 minutes. Think about that. A process that once consumed half a day could now be completed in little more than an hour. The impact was enormous. Costs fell, output increased, prices dropped, and something extraordinary happened. For the first time in history, large numbers of ordinary families could realistically afford an automobile. Henry Ford did not simply build cars. He created access. He transformed a luxury into a mass market product. And in doing so, he changed modern life forever. Roads expanded. Suburbs grew. Travel became easier. Entire industries emerged around automobile ownership. But Henry was not finished. His next decision would be even more controversial. In the winter of 1914, Henry Ford shocked the business world. He announced that many of his workers would receive $5 per day. At the time, that wage was considered extraordinarily high. Competitors laughed. Business leaders criticized him. Some believed he had lost his mind. Why would any company voluntarily double wages? Why would a businessman reduce his profits like that? But Henry saw something others did not. Workers were leaving factories. Training replacements was expensive. Productivity suffered. And experienced employees were difficult to retain. Higher wages solved those problems. But Henry's thinking went even further. He realized that workers were not just labor. Workers were customers. If employees earned more money, they could buy more products, including his products. The people building the cars could eventually become the people driving them. It was a revolutionary idea. Mass production, combined with mass consumption. Today, economists often describe this system as Fordism. Produce more. Lower costs, pay workers enough to participate in the economy, expand the market, then repeat the cycle. And it worked. Ford factories attracted workers from across America. Production increased dramatically. Sales exploded. The company grew into one of the largest industrial organizations in the world. But the most surprising part is this. Henry Ford probably never imagined how far his ideas would travel. Because decades later, thousands of miles away, another country would study his system and then make it even better. By the middle of the 20th century, Henry Ford had already changed America. But his greatest influence was still ahead. Across the Pacific Ocean, Japanese manufacturers were carefully studying Western production systems. Among them was Toyota. Toyota's engineers examined Ford's factories. They studied assembly lines. They analyzed production flows. They looked closely at what made Ford successful. But they also noticed something important. Ford's system was incredibly efficient, yet it could also be rigid. Factories worked best when producing huge quantities of the same product. The world, however, was changing. Customers wanted more variety. Markets became more competitive, and so Toyota took Ford's ideas and improved them. Instead of simply copying the assembly line, they introduced new concepts: just-in-time manufacturing, continuous improvement, waste reduction, flexible production. The philosophy became known as Kaizen, small improvements repeated every day. Over time, Toyota transformed these ideas into one of the most effective production systems ever created. The results were extraordinary. Toyota became one of the most respected manufacturers in the world. Its methods spread across Asia. Factories in South Korea adopted similar principles. Electronics manufacturers embraced continuous improvement. Industrial giants learned to combine Ford's efficiency with Toyota's flexibility, and slowly a new manufacturing powerhouse emerged in Asia. What began with a farm boy in Michigan had evolved into a system powering entire economies. But the story was still not over, because this other country was preparing to scale these ideas to a level the world had never seen before. In recent decades, China has become the world's manufacturing giant. Factories operate at astonishing scale. Supply chains move with incredible speed, and nowhere is this transformation more visible than in the electric vehicle industry. Take BYD as an example. What started as a battery company eventually became one of the most important electric vehicle manufacturers on Earth. In recent years, BYD has sold millions of vehicles annually. Its factories produce cars, batteries, and critical components at extraordinary scale. And while the technology is modern, the underlying logic would have been familiar to Henry Ford. Increase efficiency, reduce costs, expand production, make advanced technology affordable to ordinary people. That is exactly what Ford did with automobiles more than a century ago. The names are different, the countries are different, the technologies are different, but the business principle remains remarkably similar. The companies that change the world are often not the ones that invent a technology first. They are the ones that make it accessible to millions. That is why electric vehicles are becoming more affordable. That is why production continues to grow. And that is why manufacturing remains one of the most powerful engines of economic development. From Ford to Toyota, from Toyota to modern Asia, the blueprint continues to evolve, yet its foundations remain surprisingly familiar. Which brings us back to the question we asked at the beginning. Why does a farm boy from Michigan matter to modern Asia? Now we finally have the answer. Most people think Henry Ford built a car company. That is true. But it is not the most important thing he built. Henry Ford's greatest invention was not the automobile, it was not the Model T, it was not even the assembly line itself. His greatest invention was a system. A system capable of taking expensive technology and making it affordable for ordinary people. A system that connected productivity, wages, manufacturing, and consumption. A system that transformed industries. A system that crossed oceans and generations. Today, its influence can be seen everywhere, in automobile factories, in electronics manufacturing, in global supply chains, in the rise of Asian industrial powerhouses, and in the products millions of people use every single day. The world remembers Henry Ford as an automotive pioneer. History should remember him for something even bigger. He helped create the blueprint for modern manufacturing, a blueprint that shaped America, a blueprint that helped transform Asia, and a blueprint that continues to shape the future. Because in the end, Henry Ford did not simply put the world on wheels, he taught the world how to manufacture the future.